United States is a maritime nation. It is a strategically insular nation with global commitments. Our coastline stretches some 1,200 miles from Maine to Florida, and over 1,200 miles from Washington to California. Alaska and Hawaii add over 2,000 more miles. In addition to being a maritime nation, we have had since World War II inescapable global responsibilities. A carefully designed strategy has become particularly important, as the Soviets have developed a formidable blue water navy able to challenge U.S. interests worldwide. In the early 1980s, our Navy, Marine Corps strategic objectives were articulated in a clear way as a component of our national military strategy. Briefly stated, those objectives were to provide peacetime presence, to control crises, and to deter war. We plan to achieve those objectives while operating in conjunction with our allies and sister services. Should deterrence fail, our objective is to contribute to favorable war termination. This will be accomplished by destroying enemy maritime forces, protecting sea lines of communication, and supporting land battles. Our Navy has always had a significant purpose. The tall ships conveyed to many romantic images of a simpler time. The crack of canvas, the sting of salt spray, and the smell of marlin. But the romance of sail sometimes permits us to forget that beyond these colorful images, these were ships with a purpose, built to carry out the maritime strategy of their time. Sleek, fast ships designed to run blockades. Heavy ships of the line to protect our arteries of commerce. And a shipbuilding program to ensure our mastery of the seas in the chancy years ahead. All part of our maritime strategy, all in support of our national policies. Throughout the years, our maritime strategy has undergone change through peace and war. But it's always derived from our national policies, our national military strategy. Then and now, naval forces are forces with a purpose. Whether on station in the forward areas of the world or exercising closely to our own shores to maintain readiness. How these forces are employed, ports they visit, operations they conduct, comprise our maritime strategy. A dynamic strategy designed to meet the changing threats to our national interests. The maritime strategy of today provides the framework for everything we do. It provides a framework for Navy long-range programming and planning, the types and classes of ships we build, the weapons we design, our fleet operations, the tactics we employ for the most effective use of the Navy Marine Corps team. Before we discuss the maritime strategy, we must look at our national military strategy. The maritime strategy is derived from this strategy. Our national military strategy is designed to preserve this country's political identity, its framework and institutions, to protect the United States, including its foreign assets and allies, to foster our country's economic well-being, and to bolster an international order supportive of the vital interests of this country and our allies. To achieve these ends, our national military strategy is built on three pillars: deterrence, forward defense, and global coalition defense. This national military strategy is derived from guidance from the President in national security decision directives, from treaties ratified by Congress, from the Secretary of Defense in key documents such as the Defense Guidance, and from the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the Joint Strategic Planning document and the Joint Strategic Capabilities Plan, and considers the plans of the unified commanders and major NATO commands. In summary, our national military strategy is derived from national guidance and is supportive of the treaties and international agreements ratified by Congress. The maritime strategy recognizes that the unified and specified commanders fight the wars under the direction of the President and Secretary of Defense. It is not a detailed war plan with firm timetables, tactical doctrine, or specific target sets. Our maritime strategy, as a component of our national military strategy, provides a global perspective to operational commanders often faced with competing priorities. The goal of our national strategy is to control crisis and deter war. As the naval component of the national military strategy, the maritime strategy is designed to support campaigns in ground theaters of operations, both directly and indirectly. Its success depends on the contributions of our sister services and allies. Accordingly, we rely on joint operations with the Marine Corps, with the Air Force, Army, and Coast Guard in planning, exercising, and executing joint operations. The maritime strategy covers the entire spectrum of warfare. This spectrum can be viewed in two parts. First, a period of violent peace, and second, war. If we were to look at this spectrum graphically, we can picture the vertical axis as representing the level of hostility, and the horizontal axis as the spectrum from peace through war. Violent peace can be thought of as volatile international situations characterized by the underspread existence of localized conflicts and crises. Our global maritime presence is often a show of force, which sometimes becomes a use of force. War, on the other hand, can be characterized as conventional, theater nuclear, or strategic nuclear. The maritime strategy covers all phases of conflict, from violent peace through war, to winning the new peace following a global conventional war. Through successful use of maritime power across the warfare spectrum, we expect to alter the nuclear equation and make nuclear war unattractive. Now let's talk about deterrence. Deterrence means convincing a potential aggressor that the risks of aggression are greater than its possible benefits. Deterrence caused by our political, military, and economic actions is present at all levels of violence in the warfare spectrum. Deterrence is a counterforce to violence. If deterrence is successful, we avoid war. A credible deterrence must have ready and capable forces behind it and the commitment to use them if necessary. Let's look more closely at the warfare spectrum, starting with the violent peace. Our forward peacetime presence is represented by over 110,000 Navy and Marine Corps men and women serving in battle groups and battle forces, amphibious ready groups, submarine patrols, and other fleet deployments. This forward naval presence extends from Central America to West Africa, from the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean, from the Sea of Japan throughout the Pacific, a visible reminder of America's commitment to our allies. This forward naval presence incorporates joint exercises and training with the Army, the Air Force, and the Marine Corps, as well as with our allies, demonstrating the fact that these forces are mobile, flexible, and logistically self-reliant. Port visits are also an important part of that peacetime presence. In a recent year, we visited 108 countries around the globe. This forward presence, whether in the form of port visits or fleet exercises or response to crises, contributes to overall stability and to escalation control. As part of our peacetime maritime strategy, we also conduct surveillance, from a host of platforms using a variety of special sensors: acoustic, electronic, optical. Our surveillance clearly shows that we are not the only nation operating on a global scale. The Soviet Navy has an expanding worldwide force, highly visible, featuring a wide variety of platforms for execution of their policy of global encroachment. This force includes the major fleets protecting the Soviet homeland: the Northern Fleet, the Baltic Fleet, the Black Sea Fleet, and the Pacific Ocean Fleet, and includes Soviet land-based air in support of these fleets. The Soviet naval forces maintain a worldwide presence through regular overseas deployments: the Mediterranean, the Indian Ocean, and the South China Sea. The advent of Soviet maritime forces deployed globally is a new and disturbing phenomenon that has occurred in the past decade. The Soviets are not operating on a global scale because they are a maritime nation. They are doing so to support their ideology, to improve their strategic position, and secondarily, to advance their maritime interests. When we speak of the Soviet Navy, we must also consider their full range of maritime forces: the merchant ships, research ships, fishing trawlers, all an extension of their regular navy. These ships are state-controlled and serve as the Soviet Navy's eyes and ears, an important part of the Soviets' ocean surveillance efforts. Also as training ships for their officer cadre, as platforms for replenishment. In an attempt to channel the course of history, the Soviets foster evolutionary as well as revolutionary changes and support proxies and surrogates such as Libya, Cuba, and Angola, who are prone to do their bidding. There are other localized conflicts and crises which also have global implications. These conflicts and crises frequently involve U.S. and allied interests. A fundamental component of our nation's success in deterring war, particularly with the Soviet Union, rests on our ability to stabilize and control escalation in third world crises. Maritime power provides flexible military options because naval forces use the high seas and can wield their influence and power in international waters. The use of maritime power in crisis is part of our national strategy. Since 1945, U.S. naval forces have been called upon to respond to more than 200 incidents and crises around the world. Naval forces have been the force of choice of the past 8 presidents. Naval forces have been called upon to respond to crises in Lebanon, Grenada, the Red Sea, Central America, in conjunction with the shooting down of the Korean airliner, and in the Gulf of Sidra. If our peacetime presence and crisis response tasks are done well, deterrence is far less likely to fail. Deterrence can fail, however, and we must consider how the Navy would be used in a global war against the Soviets. Regardless of the scenario for global war, one thing is certain: maritime forces are vital to its successful prosecution. And our maritime forces will be used in a combined arms manner. Combined arms means mutual support among the air, land, and naval forces in pursuit of a common objective. For example, the air-land battle in the central region of Europe cannot hope to achieve success without the vital contribution of maritime forces in sea control, power projection, protection of shipping, and in strategic sea lift. Now let's consider Soviet naval strategy. Like ours, it cannot be considered alone. It is part of the overall Soviet strategy. Our objective is to attack the overall Soviet strategy by exploiting its sensitivities and vulnerabilities. Should war come, the Soviets would prefer to use their massive ground force advantage against Europe without having to concern themselves with a global conflict or with action on their flanks. It is this preferred strategy that the U.S. and its allies must counter. Although they would prefer to mass in one theater, the Soviets are also concerned about their flanks. In all probability, they will attempt to control these ocean areas, keeping our forces away from their shores. These sea control and sea denial areas are critical because they envelop the landmass of many of our allies. If we are a credible ally, we cannot cede any area by default. We can expect our adversary to conduct some out-of-area operations outside the umbrella of Soviet air defense. To appreciate the Soviet submarine threat, turn a page back to 1942. During a 6-month period in that year, only 14 U-boats accounted for the sinking of over 450 Allied merchant ships within the Caribbean and along our Atlantic seaboard. Soviet submarines are capable of further range, greater sustainability, and are more lethal than the U-boats. That is why we have an aggressive forward strategy to defeat Soviet capabilities to sever our vital sea lanes. Soviet overseas client states and surrogates could also join in the attack, threatening our sea lines of communication, complicating our strategy. Such threats would have to be addressed based on their potential impact on our war effort and on their likelihood of realization. Overall, the key to denying the Soviets their preferred strategy in a global conventional war is to ensure that they'll have to face the prospect of prolonged conventional conflict. Maritime forces have a major role to play in this regard. The maritime strategy groups our actions into 3 distinct phases: deterrence, seizing the initiative, and carrying the fight to the enemy. There are no fixed time frames associated with these phases. They provide a broad outline of what we want to accomplish. Taking these phases one at a time as we reinforce global deterrence, submarines, carrier battle groups, maritime patrol aircraft, and battleship surface action groups will move forward. Many of these forces will already be in position due to our routine peacetime operations. By the global nature of our operations, we would make clear our intention to cede no area to the Soviets by default, and to deny them the options to engage in hostilities on their terms. Timely political decision early in the crisis or conflict is essential. Conventional forces, properly positioned early on, can limit Soviet options for escalating to war. Our amphibious forces also move forward. These include amphibious task forces and air-landed marine amphibious brigades. Maritime pre-positioning ship squadrons would also get underway to support amphibious efforts. In addition to our battle forces, we can expect strategic sea lift to be activated to move equipment and supplies for war. Logistics is critical throughout the 3 phases of the strategy. The sea lines of communication and our access and that of our allies to oil and raw materials must be protected worldwide. Our early global deployment also reinforces alliance solidarity. Deployments to the Western Pacific directly enhance deterrence, including deterrence of an attack on Europe. The Soviets would be receiving a clear indication that should war come, they could not ignore any region of the globe. This positioning of our forces ties down Soviet forces, especially strike aircraft. Their ability to concentrate on Central Europe is limited by our action, which eases the burden there. Our allies would also be positioning their forces at the strategic choke points they can control. If this collective global reinforcement fails to deter war, we must then transition into Phase 2. In Phase 2, after countering the Soviet first salvo, we will move to seize the initiative. Seizing the initiative opens the way to apply direct pressure on the Soviets to end the war on our terms, the new goal of our strategy once deterrence has failed. Seizing the initiative means also that we must sink enemy forces, control the seas, protect the sea lines of communication that carry reinforcement and resupply to our forward forces, as well as those products critical to war industry. Each of these goals is supportive of the others and is integral to the success of the strategy. Our full arsenal of conventional weapons will come into play, resulting in a multi-dimensional operation, with many of our war-fighting options conducted simultaneously. Strategically, our immediate objective is to take the pressure off the center of Europe by defending or attacking on the flanks worldwide. By fighting on multiple fronts, we force the Soviets to dilute their effort. We divert their attention and force them to divide their forces and tie down their reserves. If this does not force them to cease hostilities, we turn to Phase 3, where we carry the fight to the enemy. Our objectives in Phase 3 are to destroy the Soviet Navy, influence the land battle by limiting Soviet redeployment options, by ensuring reinforcement and resupply application of carrier air and amphibious power. Contribute to war termination by being in position to threaten direct attack against the Soviet homeland or changing the nuclear correlation of forces. Strike options can support the land battle, the counter-air battle, the anti-submarine battle, and the anti-surface battle. Joint service combined arms are the key to success. Amphibious warfare is also a key element in carrying the fight to the enemy. Amphibious forces can block the enemy's ability to apply pressure on the flanks. Amphibious forces can be critical in rolling back or amputating the enemy's reach. And these forces can be instrumental in seizing or disrupting the enemy's key logistical choke points. Maritime forces thus provide strong pressure for war termination that can come from nowhere else. Our strategy is not without risk. It depends on early reaction to crisis and the political resolve to make difficult decisions early. It requires flexibility to meet the inevitable changes in Soviet strategy. That's the nature of deterrence and war fighting. In conclusion, the maritime strategy integrates all naval warfare missions. Each phase demands certain tasks and focuses on certain goals. There are uncertainties that complicate our ability to carry out our strategy, but we learn through our peacetime and crisis response operations and refine the strategy accordingly. The maritime strategy is dynamic and responsive to changing circumstances. It's designed to give us the ability to retain the strategic initiative. The United States maritime strategy has the objective of deterrence, but if deterrence fails, it provides a design to make a strategic difference as we fight with our sister services and allies to deny the Soviets their preferred strategy. Its purpose is to end the war in a way favorable to us and our allies. This is a strategy which capitalizes on the capabilities of our Navy today, our ships, aircraft, and submarines, and the immense advantage of American sailors with their well-known pride and professionalism.